The official review embargo has lifted for Marvel's The Eternals, and these reviews tell an interesting tale. That's right, Marvel fans, this movie might just be divisive.
That's why I'm here.
What's up, everybody? It's Josh coming at you from Nerd Adventures Tower as per usual. And yes, I want to talk about the reviews for Marvel's The Eternals, get into some of the things that are being said and why I think it might be a controversial movie. I also want to touch on something that was said about the edit for the movie and a sort of weird scenario in which Kevin Feige and Chloe Zhao might have butted heads. And then I want to finish off this video talking about why, despite all of this, I think I'm still really going to enjoy this movie, but it is likely to be a divisive film. And this really weird thing is happening where a lot of reviewers that are giving The Eternals a negative review are being attacked by rabid Marvel fans. And I've even experienced this a little bit myself anytime I talk about how I think maybe certain people might not like The Eternals or Eternals might be a divisive movie. Some of even our subscribers, I'm looking at you, Stormy, are coming at me pretty hard, accusing me of all sorts of crazy stuff and trying to correct my perception of these things, but that's just what it is. It's just my perception of these things. We're talking about reviews from critics and just talking about things about a movie that's not even coming out yet, but it is the main topic of discussion today. I want to pull a famous line from one of my favorite late night talk show hosts, Conan O'Brien, and just say, keep cool, my babies. Keep cool. Keep cool! Okay, so let's get into the facts of the matter. At the time of recording this video and writing this script, Marvel's Eternals is sitting at a 73% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with 45 reviews in. This could go up or down, as I expect around 200 reviews total or something near that to be coming in eventually for Eternals, and it could go down, it could dip into the 60s, it could rise and get up into the high 70s, go towards 80s, but from what I am seeing in the reviews, I think it's actually more likely that the film will drop, even though it technically did go up throughout the beginning parts of Monday. So it's not really that bad, but it's not really that great either, and I think with Eternals specifically because it's Chloe Zhao, because it's this crazy ensemble cast, and just what we were seeing from the trailers, we were expecting a cinematic masterpiece, and it really doesn't look like that's what Eternals is. In fact, if you really dig into what people are actually saying in their reviews, many of the fresh reviews still have a lot of negative things to say about the film. The main thing that I am taking away from a lot of the different reviews, including the really negative ones and the fresh scores that still bring up negative aspects of the film, is a complaint about the movie trying to do too much. It's a really long film. There's a lot of exposition that is necessary to explain these characters and where their place in the MCU is, and it kind of just seems like the movie might be doing too much for some people. There's all these different characters, and I've seen some people say you can't really form an attachment to any of them because it kind of just moves at a pretty quick clip while also injecting long periods, maybe way too long periods of exposition. Pacing seems to be a big problem with the movie because of that exposition. There really seems to be this weird stop and go pace to the picture where there are some really great action sequences that are spread throughout a really long up and down level of exposition. I've seen some attitudes from people that are saying that they were promised this really crazy cinematic experience and that the movie just kind of falls short from that. Like, there was one review that said it's crazy when you think that this is one of the most, experimental and bold things that Marvel has ever done, and yet it's Chloe Zhao's safest and lamest film. So, I've seen some people out there sort of saying, hey, if you are a cinemaphile or a cinephile, you will love Eternals, but if you really just like the MCU and that formula, you might not dig it. That's actually not what I'm seeing in the reviews. A lot of people that are giving it a negative score or Rotten Tomato are saying in so many words that they were expecting that thing. They were expecting that Chloe Zhao cinematic masterpiece, and yet it still falls short of that. It ends up being pretty formulaic despite all the experimental stuff going on. So it almost feels like it didn't go far enough in that direction to really capture that vibe for like the cinephile, like people that really love that kind of stuff. And then on the other end of that spectrum, from yes, there are many people that are saying it's too far away from the MCU formula for them to find that same level of enjoyment that they've come to expect from a Marvel movie. I've seen several people describe the movie as sort of like homework, or this thing you have to do to get to the other good stuff. And even though there's a lot of exciting stuff established in this movie, the future and the possibilities and potential of these characters is more exciting than what you actually watch them do in this very, very long film. And I'm kind of picking up on this vibe from the critics that the movie's having a crisis of identity. It doesn't know whether or not it wants to be this full-on cinematic masterpiece that completely leaves behind the MCU formula, or if it wants to be an MCU movie that just has really interesting trappings and experimental things and new ideas explored. So it almost like lives in this no man land of not quite going far enough for certain people and definitely not being close enough to the familiar formula to get like normie fans excited about it. But that's all from the reviewers, and again, there's still going to be more and more reviews trickling out over today and over the next couple of days. We have 2 weeks until this movie comes out, but I am kind of anticipating that even though it's, a little bit divided in the critical sense, that I think Marvel fans are going to have even more of a problem with this movie, because I think there are far more Marvel fans that want that familiar Marvel formula than the critics. I think the critics mostly are sort of predisposed to like certain aspects of the movie and like when it strays from the formula, and I frankly think a lot of Marvel fans will not like that aspect. It is going to be incredibly interesting to see how Marvel fans, both casual and hardcore, react to this movie, and I don't know how this is going to translate into the box office, because I almost believe that the mixed reviews and some of this weird buzz coming out for the movie might actually make more people want to go see it immediately to make up their own minds about it. So you could see Eternals having a massive box office take and yet still be considered a really divisive movie. That would be really interesting. Regardless, we will find out all of that in the next couple of weeks. Now, let me tell you why I think I might absolutely love the Eternals, and yet it still will probably be a pretty divisive movie. And I'm just gonna say it, I think a lot of these critics are not enjoying the exposition and not liking some of the pacing because they're not as hardcore sweaty about the MCU and the comic book lore as people like myself are. So if a lot of the exposition is setting up the past of the MCU, explaining things like the Celestials and the Infinity Stones and how the fabric of space-time is all pulled together within the Marvel multiverse, then that kind of exposition is going to be stuff that I absolutely love. This movie may be chock full of all sorts of tidbits and pieces of dialogue that have incredibly complicated impacts on the MCU past, present, and future. It is very possible that a lot of the stuff that even normie MCU fans found to be a little bit dry and just way too much exposition, that someone like myself will get an incredible amount of value out of that. And this idea of it being like required homework, I don't know, in some sense, that is a huge value proposition for me when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially considering where we are currently at with the MCU. We know the multiverse is breaking open. We know the multiverse is a major part of where Kevin Feige wants his characters and his stories to play around in, but we have a lot of missing pieces of information. We don't know how a lot of this all ties together. And if Eternals does help to explain some of those things and give us possible scenarios of where it will go from here, then I will personally probably absolutely love it. And we're not going to get into spoilers here, but a lot of the crazy stuff that is likely coming in the film, stuff that might actually make casual audiences scratch their head and be like, what the heck does this mean? A lot of that kind of stuff might be sort of right in line with the things I enjoy. Chloe Zhao loves manga and anime, and I think in this story she may have set up some really weird existential ideas about what it is to be human, what it is to actually have free will, and what one should do when confronted with tough choices and realities, right? So there's a lot of really weird, trippy anime stuff going on in this movie that, again, it's just my flavor. That might be stuff that I really enjoy. So I'm going into Eternals with an open mind, but I'm kind of expecting to really enjoy the film, but I do expect it to be a pretty controversial, divisive Marvel movie, which, by the way, we've had before. Marvel is able to make mistakes. It can falter. It can have a misstep. Now, before we get out of here, I want to tell you something. I want to go over this thing that Vampire Anon, or Viewer Anon, who is a pretty good insider, had to say about the editing process for Eternals, and this might be something that we revisit after we all see the movie. So here's what he says here. He says, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that Eternals is mediocre or bad. I wonder what sort of finger pointing and press stories we'll get. I heard that Chloe, Zhao, and Marvel had a lot of disagreements during editing. Full disclosure, what I'd heard is that there were disagreements, but Zhao's No Man Land Oscars sealed the deal and she got her wishes. But that accurate plot leak hit a month before the Oscars, so I don't know if they were just testing her version or what I heard was false. Jumping on something I posted at BOT, this does not mean Marvel and Zhao hated each other. I heard one thing from one person, and I questioned that because of the screening/leak Oscar win timeline. I just wonder if confirmation would come out through the trades if response isn't great. Okay, I think what he's kind of trying to say here, and it's pretty interesting, is that if Marvel Studios, and it's pretty clear that this is a divisive movie, and people are like, oh man, like this really wasn't that great, and maybe the movie doesn't perform very well, or there's some backlash, it's gonna be interesting to see how the trades cover this, how Kevin Feige covers this, and if they will, in a sense, throw Chloe under the bus. Because what he is saying here is that there were a lot of disagreements between Marvel, meaning Kevin Feige, and Chloe in the editing room. And it does sort of seem like with this movie in particular, Kevin Feige sort of loosened that iron Feige grip and let Chloe do all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't normally see in a Marvel movie, and it's yet to be determined on whether or not that is a good or bad idea. It's a really interesting discussion, which we will continue to have after the film, but there's something to be said for that familiar formula that Marvel continues to do. A lot of people are like, oh, it's the same, every movie's the same, but it's a consistent product, and it obviously resonates with a ton of people. If this movie does not, then it is possible we will look back at this and say, Feige should not have given her this carte blanche. He didn't give it to Edgar Wright. He knew what he was doing then. He should not have given it to her here. And maybe he'll tighten his grip on future projects if this happens. Just something to keep in mind, kind of an interesting discussion to think about as you go see the movie and then as we discuss it afterwards. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Let me know what you think about the reviews, the editing sort of thing, why I think I will enjoy the movie. Just let me know your thoughts in general. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel to see more of our content pop up in your recommended feed. And as I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and a nerdy day. And I'll see you in the next video.